Last week I took my first visit to Universal Studios Hollywood in LA. I was pretty excited to visit my first Universal theme park, but did it live up to the hype? This is a place that has its pros and has its cons, and this is my full in-depth review. Crazily enough, the park originally opened in 1964. I did not know that it had been around for so long. I know the park's original intention was to have a lot more behind-the-scenes elements from movies, and while a lot of that is gone now, they've replaced it with good themed areas from their movies. Now before we go any further, I need to note something very important. This park is split up into two halves, the upper lot and the lower lot. The park is built on a huge hill, and the entrance is located on the upper lot, but in order to get to the lower lot, you have to use 4 sets of escalators. It's pretty cool, but the first time you use these escalators, it feels like they go on forever. Credit where credit is due for Universal, because I imagine this was not a simple construction project. If you love taking pictures or videos, then these escalators are for you, because in between the escalators are some amazing views. This ranges from the mountains in the surrounding area to even an overhead view of the lower lot and Super Nintendo World. It's kind of a cool element, to be honest, and you don't get it at very many theme parks. It does break the immersion a little bit because it kind of feels like you're park hopping, but nonetheless, I don't see a huge issue with it. All that to say, it's something that you should definitely take note of before your visit. Speaking of planning before your visit, Universal Studios Hollywood has a tiered pricing system when it comes to tickets. It can cost anywhere from about $114 to $150. This of course depends on when you're going to visit. A Saturday in the summer is going to be more expensive than a Wednesday in April, for example. They also do offer a skip the line system with the Universal Express Pass, but from what I can see, this is more expensive than the park ticket, which makes it pretty expensive. So unless you're going on a summer Saturday or on a holiday, which I wouldn't recommend anyway, then you probably shouldn't buy this just because of the price. And at the end of the day, Universal Studios Hollywood is run to pretty much perfection. When it comes to the operations and the cleanliness, they are top notch. People praise Disney for those last two things, but Universal does them just as well. So overall, while I wouldn't recommend buying the Fast Pass, I would recommend buying the early entry. As of this recording, May 11th, 2023, for just the price of $20, you get early access to Super Nintendo World 1 hour before the official park opening time. It also seems on most days that they open Revenge of the Mummy at 7:30 and the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at 7:30 as well. There are a few reasons I'd recommend getting this ticket add-on. Number 1, you get an extra hour in the park. So even if you don't actually do any rides during that time, you still get to experience the park with not as many people, which is fun. But more importantly is being able to ride Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge. This attraction just opened a couple months ago, so naturally it has been extremely busy. I've seen the wait time at about the 4-hour mark before, which is just insane. Granted, it's not always that long, but I've seen it get to that point at times. So being able to get on this in the morning with a 30-minute wait or less saves tons of time. Also, if I'm understanding it correctly, if you do buy the Express Pass, it does skip the line for Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge, which doesn't always happen for the park's brand new ride, so that's pretty cool. Well, while we're talking about Bowser's Challenge, let's go into the ride and the ride lineup as a whole. This is a super unique attraction, and I think it's very well done. I think the physical elements could stand on their own as a good attraction, but they added these glasses which are super interesting. They're almost like virtual reality in a way, which I think is pretty cool. It's kind of tough to tell from a POV, but at least you get the general idea of what's going on. I would have thought that a Mario-based ride would have been a little bit faster as far as the actual ride vehicle is concerned, but I don't think it really needs a whole lot more speed than it has. It's pretty slow moving. This is one that you just can't quite get the same experience by watching a video. You have to go out and ride it for yourself. It's super unique. That being said, it was not even close to being my favorite ride in the park, but since I've never played Mario in my life, I know. I wasn't the target audience for this experience anyway. If I was a Mario fan or had grown up playing Mario, then I bet I would have enjoyed this a lot more than I did, and that's just how these things go, but it's still a cool ride. Sticking in the lower lot, this is where you can find my personal favorite 2 attractions. Let's start with the best roller coaster in the park, Revenge of the Mummy. This coaster, manufactured by Premier Rides, opened in 2004. The ride is located indoors and is pretty dark both from a thematic perspective and a literal perspective, but I thought it was awesome and it was more thrilling than I was anticipating going in. The ride starts with a detailed indoor bit. It goes by a little too quickly, to be honest, because there's so many details here that you just don't see on your first ride. Oh, bummer. I guess we gotta ride Revenge of the Mummy again. I'm so sad. You enter this room where Imhotep is telling you how he wants your soul. I told you, it's kind of dark. And then right before you launch, after he says, "Your souls are mine," 2 warriors, or whatever you call them, drop down from both sides right as you launch. It's kind of crazy. If you look at the numbers, this LAM launch doesn't seem like it would be super powerful, but when you're riding it, it feels pretty punchy. There's also an excellent ejector airtime moment right before the backwards section. The aforementioned backwards section comes after you come face to face with a bunch of creepy crawlies. The backwards section itself is definitely not as thrilling as the first half of the ride, but it's still fun not knowing where you're going to go next. Then, when the ride ends, you go into this room full of flashing lights and, when we were there at least, fog. It was super disorienting. And with that, the ride is over. RCDB says it has a duration of 2 minutes, which really isn't that bad for a roller coaster, but it does feel kind of short when you're on it. But now that I'm thinking about it, they really did fit a lot into this roller coaster. It is worth noting that before you enter the queue, you have to put all your stuff into a locker, but at least they're free. There's a couple of rides with this policy, and we'll get to that as we get to the ride. Located just across the midway is none other than Jurassic World The Ride. To put it simply, this is one of the best boat rides there is. Jurassic World The Ride starts out as a pleasant journey through Jurassic World as they show off some of their animals, including a very convincing screen of the Mosasaurus. You then move outside for a brief moment and see a good Stegosaurus animatronic before, go figure, something goes wrong. The Indominus Rex has escaped and the tension builds as you enter Tyrannosaurus Rex Kingdom. The whole time you build up to one of the best finales on any dark ride. This final scene features 2 incredible animatronics, the better of the 2 being the huge Indominus Rex. Of course, you know it's an animatronic, but it looks so good and so convincing. And then the Tyrannosaurus Rex pops out, and this whole bit is very reminiscent to the end of the movie Jurassic World, where the T-Rex and the Indominus Rex fight. As if that wasn't enough, the final plunge is a great one. I don't think you'll get any airtime here, but you do get a stomach-dropping sensation. This ride is one of my favorite boat rides out there, and it's awesome start to finish, but especially at the finish. You also don't seem to get soaked unless you sit in the front row, so plan accordingly. Finally, there's one more ride in the lower lot, being Transformers The Ride 3D. Unfortunately, the ride was closed the day of our visit, so we did not get to experience this, but it looks like a pretty solid dark ride. It is screen-based, but it also mixes in some physical elements, which definitely helps. So overall, in my case, I would much rather have this closed than Jurassic World, but it was still a bummer. The other ride I did not get a chance to experience was The Simpsons. This is a simulator, and it looks like a good time. There's plenty of jokes throughout, of course, because it's The Simpsons, and I like the fact how there's subtle or not so subtle shots under nearby competitors Disney and SeaWorld. The Simpsons ride was open on the day of our visit, but the line was just a little too long. We didn't want to wait 40 minutes or more for this attraction. That being said, this, behind Bowser's, is the next busiest ride in the park, so if you want to ride this, make it a priority early in the day if possible, because the line will build up. Speaking of simulators, another simulator at the park is Kung Fu Panda. This ride does not have nearly as much motion as the Simpsons ride does, but I don't think it's nearly as good either. You sit in a theater, and if I remember correctly, there's no restraints, but they do have clever projection mapping at the very end of the show, which is pretty cool. And if you didn't know much about the ride going in, then that would certainly be unexpected, so I think that's a neat aspect of Kung Fu Panda, but it's not too noteworthy outside of that. Taking a break from the screen-based rides for a moment, Secret Life of Pets Off the Leash is an awesome dark ride. This ride is only a couple years old, and I think it was exactly what this park needed. They didn't have, outside of Jurassic World, a physical set-based dark ride, which makes this edition so perfect. The movies themselves are fun and cute, and I think that's exactly how I would describe the ride as well. Of course, your journey to get adopted isn't without incident, as at one point you run into the dreaded cats. But you make it out and proceed to get adopted. At the very end, there's a screen in front of you showing what you'd look like as a dog, and I was playing around with it, and it actually follows your movements. If you raise your arms or cross your arms or move your head, it follows you on the screen, which I thought was pretty neat. It's a shame I got to ride this only once, because it's a great dark ride, and there's a lot of stuff to notice. I bet that if we had had time to ride it again later in the day, I would have noticed something new. There's just so many little details. People might critique the fact that the animatronics aren't nearly as good as Disney's, and while I would agree, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, it's a great ride nonetheless. If you take a few steps from Secret Life of Pets, you will find Despicable Me Minion Mayhem, yet another simulator. While on the topic, I think this park does need some other non-simulator rides because so many of their attractions are screen-based, but nonetheless, Despicable Me Minion Mayhem is a pretty solid ride. On this attraction, you get turned into a minion, and the screen-based part is your minion training. Thankfully, you get turned back into a human, somewhat by accident, at the very end. It's a somewhat chaotic ride, but overall, it's an enjoyable one. And as far as simulators in the park are concerned, it would be middle of the pack. The other roller coaster besides Revenge of the Mummy in the park is Flight of the Hippogriff. This ride originally opened in 2016, and I thought for sure it was built by Vekoma, but it was actually made by Mach. Nonetheless, it does exactly what it sets out to do, be a family coaster that anyone can enjoy. Flight of the Hippogriff does multiple things well. For starters, like Revenge of the Mummy, it's a pretty smooth experience. Also, and maybe I was just dehydrated and needing to eat as we did ride it right before lunch, but there's some G-forces on this ride. Not enough to where you're gonna gray out or anything, but enough that you'll probably feel it. Also, you get some cool views of the Hogwarts Castle, Hagrid's hut, and an animatronic. Second to last in the ride department is Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. There's a few unique rides at this park, but this one might be the most unique of them all. Also, this is another ride where you need to put your stuff into a locker. Once again, they're free. The ride itself is a dark ride, and a very interesting one at that. The robot arm that serves as the ride vehicle gives the ride a lot of variation, and there's also variation because of the screen-based bits and the physical sets-based bits. The simulator parts are cool, but in my opinion, the best parts are when it's physical sets-based, especially when you come face-to-face with the dragon. The scene with the Whomping Willow and the one with the Dementors are highlights as well. This is overall an attraction that is not done justice by video. You really have to go experience it either at the Hollywood location or at the Orlando location. That's it for the somewhat more traditional rides, but we still have yet to talk about the studio tour. When I talked about Bowser's, I mentioned how I'd never played Mario, and I probably didn't appreciate that ride nearly as much as some other people would. And since I'm not a huge movie guy, that same principle kind of applied here, but I still appreciated it. It's cool to see some of the sets that they use and some of the things that have been used in past movies. Of course, there are a couple other things of note. The earthquake in the subway station is a classic part of this attraction, including the flash flood at the end of that. I also enjoyed the parts where you had a wraparound screen, the King Kong part being so much better than the Fast and Furious part. You also have to love the Jaws segment at the end. That is another classic part of the studio tour. And even today, it's one of the highlights. Now, if you didn't notice, it's very important to note that this attraction, just the ride itself, is going to take about an hour. Because of that, I'd recommend doing this ride in the afternoon. While not technically a ride, the park's best show, Waterworld, has got to be mentioned. This stunt show is legendary, and for a reason. I was very glad we were able to see it because it's one of, if not the, best show of any kind I've ever seen. It's a stunt show and it's really impressive what they were able to do. I mean, just look at the set. That alone is impressive. There's numerous fun stunts throughout the show, and sometimes I wonder how these actors don't injure themselves, and to be honest, they probably do on occasions. The most awesome part though is the plane crash. Seriously, they crash a plane into the set. It's wild. I happened to know going in that it was coming, but that didn't make it any less sweet. Overall, Waterworld is a show you got to see when you're at Universal Studios. That rounds out the major rides and attractions. Overall, I do think they're a little heavy on the screen-based simulator type ride, and adding some more non-simulators would help their lineup, but it's a pretty solid park overall when it comes to rides. Their top 3 is very good, and some of the supporting rides fill in nicely. As a general rule, these rides are placed in well-themed areas. This is evident especially in a land like the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, a land that is very immersive, and while it is better in Florida because it has Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure, say that 5 times fast, what they have at Hollywood is still very good. That being said, while the areas look good, they need a little more variation. I think an Adventureland type area would do wonders at this park because it's pretty much just big buildings and streets. Again, it's not a huge deal, but if they had a nature-themed area with a roller coaster and maybe a physical sets-based dark ride, I don't know if there's space for that, but that would help this park's lineup tremendously. One area that is a little bit different from the rest of the park is Super Silly Funland. I was barely in this area, but it's kind of the kids area. You got one little swing ride and some water play structures. The whole look at the area is pretty cute, and while it isn't very expansive, I am glad that they have it. Now let's talk about the food. The food at Universal Studios Hollywood is better than your Six Flags park, but a step below Disney in my opinion. There are a couple good options. Toadstool Cafe in Super Nintendo World looks interesting, but one good restaurant is Three Broomsticks, located at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. This seems like a good a time as any to bring up City Walk, which has lots of food options. It's basically the downtown Disney area of Universal. Because the park closed at 7 on the day of our visit, we ate dinner outside the park in City Walk after the park closed. We went to the NBC Sports Grill and Brew and sat at a table that was a foosball table. It was awesome. I would say if you have an opportunity to go to City Walk, you should, but you should prioritize the park over City Walk. On that note, I thought Universal Studios Hollywood did a great job with their merchandise. I really thought that there was a lot of good options here. And while I opted to buy some other stuff instead, this Indominus Rex shirt is hilarious. I feel like when I'm at a Disney park, I struggle to find things I like because so much of the merchandise is just based off of Mickey Mouse. And I like Mickey Mouse, but not to the extent that I'm gonna buy a shirt typically. Universal had a lot of park-specific shirts and sweatshirts and hats and whatnot. In fact, as I'm recording this, I'm wearing a Universal Studios Hollywood shirt that I got there. Their prices also seem to be a lot lower. Shirts were about $10 less, and I didn't pay attention to the prices of anything else, but that's good too. And finally, one final note before closing, I gotta give them props on their live entertainment. Their interactive characters are fantastic. We didn't come face to face with any of the dinosaurs that they have out occasionally by Jurassic World, but Megatron was really cool. That figure looked a lot like the Megatron from the Transformers movies. They also had a couple actors around Secret Life of Pets, that general area, so that was pretty neat too. But I gotta tell you, one of the highlights of the day for us was interacting with Snowball. In total, we, and specifically my sister, talked to him for probably about half an hour and we were dying with laughter.
You guys had a good day because I had a great start to my morning. I had a croissant, some potatoes.
I hate to compare it to Disney again, but I feel like the characters at Universal are a lot better than the ones at Disney, and they're much more interactive typically. So if you're still watching at this point, first of all, thank you. And second of all, I would recommend visiting Universal Studios Hollywood. The park is far from perfect. There's lots of things that they can improve over time. But I still think it would be tough not to have a fun day here. There's a decent amount of stuff to do, and even if you're not doing a ride, you can appreciate the themed areas. I can't wait to visit the Universal parks in Orlando sometime because I know that Universal Studios Hollywood is just a taste of that resort over there. And if this park is any indication of what the Universal Orlando resort could be, then yeah, I want to go there. But anyways, thank you for sitting down and watching this video, and I'll see you next time.